Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, as I dip back into the satanic goo, one person who tends to come up all the time is Sammy Davis Jr., who's had an interesting life, who claimed to be Puerto Rican when apparently he was half Cuban. So the point is, I don't know if his mother was Cuban. So he's not this black guy that everybody thinks he is. He's half Hispanic and apparently Cuban. He mentioned Puerto Rican because of the problems with Cubans at his time in the 60s. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis, all the things. So that's the latest thing that people are talking about. Very similar to what happened with Bruce Lee, who kept saying that he was German when he actually was Dutch Jewish. And people do this for a reason. So, again, people have some perverse quality they give to the Germans. So when you say that you're German, instead of saying Dutch, what's that? And Jewish, it was kind of like a double strike. So this is what Sammy stated that he was. And, of course, his family were involved in show business, and so he kind of followed along with that, learned the typical vaudeville stuff, obviously had a great singing voice, and so forth. So he went through that. Apparently, he went through the usual, the horrific times of having black people that can't get hotel rooms. They have to go to different areas. It's shocking that this was happening from the 50s and 60s, etc. You have to really wonder what the Civil War was about. Well, I don't. You left a bunch of scum bucket people at their own lands. We've done this for centuries. Thousands of years where we've left criminals who we've conquered in charge of their country still. Well, the Romans didn't do that. That's why they held the world for 600 years. So the point is there was nothing ever solved by the Civil War. And by the way, I don't know if people understand that, but there were battles in the Civil War, several of them, completing Gettysburg. 50,000 men died. Or the 10 years that we were in Vietnam, we lost 50 or 60,000 men. One battle, we lost that. And there were several other battles like that where we lost 50, 60,000 men in one battle. So this is not a joke here. And then after all that fighting, the bend-over Yankees went in there and didn't handle things correctly. So you don't let people have property, etc. You take everything over, you convert it, and you should have never been able to see the Confederate flag ever again. It should have been the death penalty. And now it's put up as Southerners put that up as a show that they're Southerners. Southerners were traitors to the country. And that's not a traitor symbol you put up there. So this is the kind of nonsensical stuff that goes on. But apparently he went into the military and was harassed every day by Southerners in the military. And this is so typical of the military that people get away with a bunch of things unless somebody wants to enforce it and throw you in Leavenworth for doing nothing. And there's a lot of cases of that as well. But from there, he got into different areas of show business. What's interesting is his belief systems. And that's what we're going to go into. He was a member of, in whatever way we want to what does that mean? We want to look into that as well here, a member of the Church of Satan. And he has pictures of him with Anton LaVey and my favorite Satanist, Michael Aquino. But he's also, he had a very mystical, metaphysical, manifesting scientist, occult scientist moment in his life, which is quite interesting. And we're going to talk about that here. So, and I think it's something that few people know about. It's easy to say that he was a member of the Church of Satan, which was popular back then. And I think there are reasons for that. Certainly, many blacks certainly get disillusioned with the nonsensical Christian white churches that really have never done anything to help them and still to this day don't, where they're murdered in the street. And, where are all the churches coming out into the streets to protest this? You don't see it unless it's in the neighborhood it happened. But Christians, and particularly the worthless cowards that they are, should be out in the streets all the time protesting the horrible treatment of citizens of this country by law enforcement, unlaw enforcement. So the whole idea is that this is the type of thing. So you can certainly understand that people are disillusioned, but the whole idea is to say that something is bad and then become the opposite. I mean, this happened in the Vietnam War with Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda was against the war. A lot of people were against the war. And that's your right, and you should express that. And I think that was the right thing. At the time, I was for the war, which I'm not today. But the point is that she didn't protest against that. And you got to remember, people are coming home blown to pieces in boxes. This is not a joke. Thousands of them, 500-600 troops a month. This is not a joke. People's lives are snuffed out. People are in bad, torn to pieces mentally and physically. She went to North Vietnam and had pictures taken in an anti-aircraft gun, shooting down Americans. Well, this is traitorism, and she should have been hung for that. That is ridiculous. You certainly have your freedom of speech, and you should be protesting against bad stuff. You don't go to the enemy. And, of course, that's what happens with a lot of people who reject Christianity because of the dung-filled belief that is. They would think, well, I'm going to become a Satanist. And I've heard many Satanists who told me that this is the strong path. And they think it's a strong way because you fight back when, with Christianity, what's the old saying? Turn the other cheek. So the whole idea is that certainly that has no appeal, and neither has no appeal is somebody dead on a cross. What kind of symbol is that? It's just unbelievable that would turn into their symbol, and shows you the kind of sick mentality that religion perpetrates. Well, of course, in the past, that didn't start out there. The Christian symbol was the fish, prosperity. They were known for their healing. Now they're known for a dead guy on a stick. I think that's just horrendous. Not to mention the horrible corruption within the Christian churches on all levels. It just goes on. But it's everywhere. It's not like there's not corruption in all belief systems. The blacks who go to the Nation of Islam, well, it's the Muslims who were the slave traders. The Muslim Spanish traders went into Africa and got all the slaves. And of course, blacks enslaved other tribes they didn't like, and to this day say they did that because they beat their enemies and then had them enslaved. So there's a whole bunch of things, life is complicated, it's not as straightforward. But to become a Muslim, which is not part of your belief system as a black person, Islam is a Middle Eastern religion, not an African religion. People get this confused. There's Africa, North Africa, Egypt, what is all those countries? Libya, all the countries that are up there, Nigeria. Well, people see these as, a lot of times the Muslims have taken over in those areas, but it is not indigenous to Africa. African religions are not there. If you want Egyptian, other religions are indigenous to North Africa. Even though you got to remember that Egyptians tend to be more Mediterranean Caucasians, they're not really black or Negroid. Another thing people misunderstand. But all the things that go on there is ridiculous. So, but you're not going to find Nation of Islam blacks have pride. They read, they write. I'm assuming they have good jobs. I don't know how they work together, but certainly they have that which the Christian church has never been able to really develop. But it's always interesting there. So he didn't go to Islam. He converted to Judaism. He had a good friend of his, which was Eddie Cantor. Eddie Cantor is a famous Jewish comedian who was very popular, 50s, 40s, 50s. So he was very popular. Of course, nobody knows of him today, but he was on radio, singer, dancer, comedian, songwriter, familiar to Broadway, radio, movies. He's a really big actual star at that time. And he befriended Sammy Davis. And, of course, the Jewish people have always tended to, and particularly in the past, befriended blacks, seeing them as fellow persecuted people. And apparently this has fallen out. I don't know why. There's so many strange things happening with Judaism, it's hard to say. But he befriended him, and I'm not sure how you say this word, but he gave Sammy Davis a house protection amulet. A mezula a piece of parchment contained in a decorative case inscribed with specific Hebrew verses from the Torah. And this was a protective type amulet, basically. And a lot of Jews, I think, hang these at their doors or so forth. Not sure exactly how you use these, but it's a very classic. It's kind of like having a cross or other things that Christians would have. So this is a big item that all Jews have. It's a scroll of sacred words put in this container, etc. So Eddie Cantor gave this to him. And Sammy just loved it. He thought this was great, and he converted over to Judaism. And then there was a famous automobile accident in 1954 in San Bernardino, California. He was making a return trip from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. And these are big open roads, and everybody's driving very fast here. A lot of people have been killed on these roads. It's not talked about that much, but these are desert roads, and everybody's doing 90, 100 miles an hour, and a lot of times. Now, during the previous year, he had started a friendship with Eddie Cantor, who gave him this holy item. Instead of putting it by his door as the traditional blessing is done, because, okay, that reaffirms the fact. Generally, you're supposed to put this at the opening of your door. It's supposed to keep evil out. Davis wore it around his neck for good luck. The only time he forgot it was the night of the accident. The accident occurred at a fork in the Route 66 at Canyon Boulevard and Kendall Drive. I'm not sure where that is, but that's a long road there. Davis subsequently, from this accident, lost his left eye to a bullet-shaped horn button, a standard feature in the Cadillacs of that time, that his face slammed into. His friend, actor James Chandler, said he was given one of his... he would give one of his own eyes to keep Davis from total blindness. Jeff Chandler was, again, a very popular actor at that time, and obviously a good friend of Sammy. So he wore an eye patch for at least 6 months following the incidents. He featured the eye patch on his album and, of course, made it part of his act, etc. So, very interesting. In the hospital, Cantor described to Davis the similarities between Jewish and black cultures. Davis, born to a Catholic mother and a Baptist father, began studying Jewish history, converting to Judaism several years later in 1961. So it's very interesting of his conversion over to something after a near-death experience, which isn't unusual. So, the accident marked a turning point in Davis's career, taking him from a well-known entertainer to a national celebrity. So, I'm sure it didn't hurt that becoming Jewish with all the Jewish Hollywood people that could help him as well. But needless to say, after almost dying in a horrible accident, losing one of your eyes, certainly this became a big thing to him, and eventually he converted over. This is, and he was good friends with Eddie Cantor. But it's interesting that this accident, the one time, he's been wearing this for years, and all of a sudden, the one day that he was not wearing this, you could say, protective cell, a protective energy cell based in Judaism, he would get into this terrible accident and almost get killed. Interesting, and of course, this is another one of those big occult science experiences that nobody talks about or is mentioned briefly. What does that mean? Well, the regular people just want to rationalize this. But, this is why everybody needs to have protective cells on them, doing protection as well, because these things can mean the difference between getting into accidents or not, or if you do get into accidents, of surviving them. There's another very interesting story about him being of the outrageous prejudice and the things that went on is just mind-screwing. And this isn't, 1800s. In 1957, Davis was involved with Kim Novak, a white actress of some fame and a beautiful woman. Harry Cohen, the president of Columbia, gave in to his worries that backlash against the relationship could hurt the studios. There are several accounts of what happened, but they agree that Davis was threatened by organized crime figures close to Cohen. Cohen, of course, the president of Columbia at that time. According to one account, Cohen called racketeer John Roselli, who was told to inform Davis that he must stop seeing Kovacs. So here, the head of the studios, a Jewish guy, went to the mafia to tell him to don't do this. This is bad for you. This is bad for the studios. Can you imagine this? This is mind-screwing. According to one account, let's see if we can pick it up here, to scare Davis, Roselli had him kidnapped for a few hours. Another account relates that they threatened Davis's father through Mickey Cohen, I guess, who was another gangster out of New York, I guess. Davis was threatened with the loss of another eye or a broken leg if he did not marry a black woman within 2 days. Davis sought the protection of mobster Sam Giancana out of Chicago, and he stated that he could protect him in Chicago and Vegas, but not California. It's amazing how you have to go to criminals to help you, that there's no help from the obviously law enforcement, which is so typical. Davis briefly married a dancer, Laura White, in 1958 to protect himself from mob violence. Davis had a previously dated White who was 23, divorced twice, and has a 6-year-old child. He paid her a lump sum of $10,000 or $25,000 to engage in a marriage on the condition that it would be dissolved before the end of the year. Davis became inebriated at the wedding and attempted to strangle White en route to the wedding suite. Oh, God. I wonder if that's true. Checking on him later, Davis' personal assistant found Davis with a gun to his head. Davis despairingly said, "Why won't they let me live my life?" The couple never lived together and commenced divorce proceedings in 58. The divorce was granted in 59. Look at the kind of racist, horrible things that went on. Of course, this is why things never change and why you never can really trust anybody. Once there's a problem, that's it. You should never trust anybody who are been racist or anything else. That's the way it goes. You don't give people breaks. In 1960, there was another racially charged public controversy when Davis married, this is after his divorce, white Swedish-born May Britt in a ceremony officiated by Rabbi William Kramer of Temple Israel of Hollywood. While the interracial marriage has been legal in California since 1948, the laws in the U.S. still stood in 23 states where you couldn't interracially marry. And that's still in the 1960s. And in 1958, only 4% of the Americans supported interracial marriages. So during this period of time, which I guess was 2 years that he was married to her, he got all sorts of hate mail and threats on his life because he married this white woman, which she wanted to be married. So this is all the kind of after, and then of course he had all this stuff. Apparently these they ruled it unconstitutional to deny interracial marriages. So it's very interesting of all these horrible things that happened. Of course, he took up a hobby of gun handling. Obviously, why not? Certainly is a good way to do that. Apparently, he was even snubbed by John F. Kennedy because of his actions, because at that time it would hurt his career, I guess. But it just shows you, the Kennedys are so weird as well. All of that, that was going on there at that time. Kennedys are very weird, and they're weird in general. As we get in. So let's move on into the other areas in terms of his involvement with Satanism. Now, after he became, and of course this was the 60s as Satanism became, and you can certainly see he certainly didn't want to necessarily follow any kind of traditional religions. He went into Judaism. I guess that helped him to a degree, but he was a guy that was also had a lot of drug and sex problems, so he claims. So he got heavily involved in drugs, he got heavily involved in pornography, and of course, getting involved in Satanism was kind of blended into all of this, which of course makes a certain amount of sense. And as I said, I don't know what he did with the Church of Satan. It's hard to say. We do have some talk about Michael Aquino, the head of the Temple of Set, of keeping contact with Sammy Davis. Apparently, Anton LaVey didn't give him any special privileges or have much contact with Sammy Davis. I don't find anywhere that there is any donations made by him. He, needless to say, had money, but the bottom line is that he wasn't giving it to anybody in the church that we can find. So he wasn't supporting the church in any way that we know of. So he wasn't giving money, which is generally what rich people do. Now, there were several celebrities, even a congressman, that were involved in the Church of Satan. James Mansfield, I believe, was the famous actress. And of course, I don't know if she's a big actress or not. She ended up getting killed in a car accident, but she certainly was fairly popular at that time. She was kind of a bimbo, a second to go to after Marilyn Monroe, from what I understand. So she really wasn't all that popular, but I guess she was popular enough. And there was a few congressmen and other people, and who knows what other celebrities were hooked up. It was kind of the fashionable thing to do at that time, and to get in with the decadence of the drugs and sex culture that was so big in the 60s and was everywhere. And Anton LaVey did get some. He was in movies, he got a lot of the TV appearances, and of course he was a consummate showman that went out there and been in that entire area. It's kind of interesting that Anton LaVey was a photographer and even worked for the police at one time. These little, I don't think we can underestimate these little connections to him being supported. But ultimately, Anton LaVey was a big failure. His divorce from his wife got all of his property. He lost everything. Somebody bought the house he was living in and gave it back to him conveniently. And ultimately, he died in poverty and didn't really do much of anything. And sales from his books were so small that it really wasn't much. But and we don't have too much information where I can find of Anton LaVey comment on Sammy Davis Jr. He apparently had some contact with the sex girl, but there isn't much that he did there. And Sammy was probably pretty busy, so what connection he had, I don't know. Did he show up at the church or some ritual? Did he have a card? Now, Michael Aquino visited Sammy Davis on several occasions. But as you said, Anton LaVey apparently didn't pay much attention to anybody, and I'm assuming that was because they weren't contributing to the organization much. I'm assuming that Sammy would have got a lot more of attention if he was giving lots of money to the church, and that would have been noted. There doesn't seem to be any note of any money being given. Being the little brown noser that Michael Aquino is, he made contact with him on several occasions, Sammy Davis, and apparently visited him and they talked. So what all these were about, we can't believe anything there. In terms of Sammy Davis's autobiography, is that it states that he mentioned in his book that, yes, he did have friends at the Church of Satan, and for many years. And that was it. He didn't go into it. It's certainly not going to be something that's going to help the sales of your book. But he was ballsy enough and interested enough to mention that he was friends with people in the Church of Satan. I don't think he said he was a member or anything else, but he stated that he had friends there at the Church of Satan and had known them for many years. But did he go to any events? Did he participate in any of their nude altar events? We just don't know. We do know that Sammy was a drug addict and a sex addict. He stated this as well. So this is part of seems to be a normal way to get into things. But after being in there for a while, apparently he then started to practice Judaism again. So it is. Again, we just don't know. Apparently, and he died very young. He died at 65 years old from, apparently, which is horrible for him, throat cancer, which would have stopped him from singing. So they found a cancerous tumor in Davis' throat. He was a heavy smoker and often smoked 4 packs a day. And usually this adds up at this time. And at least when a lot of these kind of guys died young is because they were just, gobbling down cigarettes. So, so he had to have part of his throat removed. He went to chemotherapy and radiation. His larynx were later removed when his cancer reoccurred. He was released from the hospital on March 13th, 1990. So, he died of complications from throat cancer 2 months later at his home in Beverly Hills at the age of 64 on May 16th, 1990. So that's kind of his entire reality there. Not going into, I don't think anybody cares about the rest of his life, but in terms of his, very interesting that he lost his good luck charm, and at that same time he got into an accident that almost killed him. And that he then later got into, which was kind of popular at that time, Satanism, and had a long-time relationship with these people. So they, I guess, did accept him or happy to have him as a member of their church. So I'm not sure we can think that there is anything strange about that. But you got to remember, Satanism was never looked at as, oh, that's okay. Where's you been today, Billy? I went to the Satanic Church today. Okay, Billy, that's fine. The things that kids do now. Well, nobody ever really looked at things in that way. Satanism was always very negative practice, unless you were a dope or sex addict. In these areas, it wasn't looked at. Maybe Hollywood embraced it to a degree and put him in a few little movies. He was kind of a uniquity at the time. And as things got worse, the whole Church of Satan didn't last very long under that. It's still going today, picked up by other people. I'm sure their membership is fairly small in terms of participatory, even though Satanism is huge right now. But none of these organizations ever had any great following, and Anton LaVey really couldn't put the organization together to generate any kind of money so that he could have an official priesthood. People bought their little card for $5, and, that's okay. You get 10,000 people, so what? That's not a lot of money. He had one best-selling book, The Satanic Bible, and you're talking about a $2 book. What did he get, 20 cents from that? So the whole idea is that he didn't make a lot of money from that, and it's everywhere to be found today for free by just downloading it. He wrote other books that did not do very well, and so did his daughters and everything else. None of this seems to have done much to put any kind of income or money in his pocket. So the whole idea is that all of that is typical of Satanism. People, if they've got so much power and all of this stuff. Now, Michael Aquino, the Temple of Set, of course, was a rich kid and had a big government salary as a military officer and retirement that went with that or whatever. He had lots of money from mommy, who made millions of dollars in the real estate business. What is this? What is his involvement? Well, it doesn't really seem that he was involved in the church more than saying, well, I'm not sure why he even did that. He must have been getting something out of it, whether it was drugs or sex. He must have been getting something from that, because that certainly wasn't a star on his resume. And I'm not sure his involvement or what was happening, if he was part of the Rat Pack at this time or not. I'm not sure, looking into all of that. But certainly it isn't something that these conservative Italians like Sinatra or Dean Martin would have thought was okay in the bigger picture. We know how hypocritical these kind of people are, particularly the mafia, etc. So the point is that all of that was part of the problems of going on there. So what is his involvement? It doesn't look like he was really involved. There isn't really any stories about him, even gossip. Even though there is one story that was passed on to me again through YouTube, so we don't and I'm assuming this can be checked out, but, Jerry Seinfeld has a new show, Coffee with Celebrities or whatever. And they drive around in his Porsche and they talk about stuff. And apparently he had one of his guests that he had on his show, Jerry Seinfeld's show, was Eddie Murphy. And Eddie Murphy, during this conversation, I don't know why you would even necessarily bring this up, but I guess it is kind of fascinating. But I don't know how many people even know who Sammy Davis Jr. is anymore. I'm in my 60s, and of course, he was fairly popular when I was in my teens, and so forth. But, what did he die? What did it say there? I'm not sure, 1965 or something. But let me correct that. He died in 1990. So, and he was fairly active into the 80s there and maybe even into the 90s before he got sick. But Eddie Murphy talked about the fact that he had a conversation with Sammy Davis, and Sammy Davis said that he was a Satanist and that he should take up the practice as well, that he's gotten a lot out of being a Satanist, and that Eddie Murphy would benefit from it as well. That's an interesting statement again, meaning the fact that it may not be as drug and sex related as we think, that he liked this. He liked that aspect. And a person who's been persecuted all their life, horribly like he has, threatened him and his family, certainly could see that going to the dark side would be good. Certainly wasn't an uprising, yet again, as I've stated, of people trying to help him that were, quote, Christian white people or Christians in general. So nobody came to his aid, and I'm not sure the Jewish community did either, for that matter. So it's not unusual, but if that's a statement that he made to Eddie Murphy and was so open about it, you have to wonder there that this was a serious commitment on his part and something that he was involved in for 20 or 30 years. How deep, how much money was given to people behind the scenes? Well, certainly Anton LaVey didn't get any of that. He had all these problems. The Church of Satan pretty much dissolved within 10, 15 years. People then did pick it up who are running it today, or at least they have some. Michael Aquino started the Temple of Set and apparently had some good contact with him over long periods of time and met with him on several occasions. So it was something that he was very open to. The fact is Michael Aquino could call him and talk to him probably very easily and readily. And they got together, and I'm not sure they talked about, again, you can't believe anything that Michael Aquino tells you, and there isn't anything that has been any statements except the brief comments I've stated already from Sammy himself. So certainly is an interesting story. Just another one, as you said, there's been several celebrities. We don't know who's practicing what now, or people who have sympathies. You hear all sorts of stories, but this has been verified, and verified by Sammy himself in his book, that he had friends at, I don't think he mentioned a member of, at the Church of Satan, and has for many years. So another little tidbit, and the fact that he was hurt when he didn't have his energy cell, his amulet to protect him, is quite fascinating. Until next time.